The first time my mother told me she wished I was never born, I was wearing my graduation gown. The fabric was still warm from the sun, heavy on my shoulders, like it knew it didn't belong in our house. And I remember thinking, she must be joking. Because who says something like that to their child, especially on a day like that? The table was covered in everything I thought would make her happy. Crystal glasses, white lilies, her favorite lemon cake. I'd even made sure the restaurant staff dimmed the lights just a little, the way she liked, because she said bright lighting gave her migraines. She sat across from me, elegant as always, not a strand of hair out of place, her lipstick perfectly done. My father sat beside her, smiling stiffly, his hand resting awkwardly near his glass, as if afraid to touch anything. And then, as the waiter brought out the cake, she turned to me and said, "You've been nothing but disappointment since the day you came into this world. We wish you were never born." The words fell so flat, so cold, that I didn't even realize what she'd said at first. Then my father's fork dropped. Nadia, my cousin, gasped quietly. And me? I just stared at the flickering candle in front of me, watching the flame bend and twist, wondering if it too wanted to disappear. People say when someone breaks your heart, you feel it. But for me, it wasn't pain at first, it was silence. A kind of numbness that wrapped itself around me like fog. It should have been one of the happiest nights of my life. Instead, it was the night I stopped trying to make her proud. Before that dinner, I used to believe love could be earned. That if I studied harder, dressed better, stayed quiet enough, maybe my mother would finally look at me and see something worth loving. My name's Hina. I'm 23, born into a family that loved perfection more than people. My mother, Samina, was the kind of woman who could turn a dinner invitation into a competition. Her life revolved around what others thought. Every word she said was measured, every glance a performance. She loved to talk about my brother, call it her pride and joy, a corporate manager in London, earning in pounds. And then there was me, the quiet one. The one who painted, who read poetry, who didn't know how to network. My father, Rashid, was gentle in that quiet, defeated way some men become after years of living with someone like my mother. He wasn't unkind, just absent. He let her words fill every room because it was easier than fighting them. Growing up, my mother had a rule: don't embarrass me. It was her way of parenting, her way of loving. When I was 12 and forgot my lines in a school play, she didn't hug me afterward. She just said, "You should have practiced harder." When I was 16 and got second place in an essay contest, she said, "Why not first?" And when I got into college, not the one she wanted, she didn't say congratulations. She just sighed. But still, I kept trying. Graduation was supposed to be my redemption. I had struggled, balancing 2 part-time jobs, late-night study sessions, and endless fear that maybe she was right about me being a failure. But I made it. And that night, I wanted to celebrate with them. I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd finally see pride in her eyes. We booked a dinner at a small restaurant overlooking the city. The kind of place that smelled like butter and garlic, with soft music playing and candles flickering on every table. When I walked in, my heart felt light. I wore a soft peach dress and carried my gown over my arm. My friends had cheered for me earlier that day, and for the first time in years, I felt seen. But as soon as I sat down with my family, that feeling started to fade. My mother barely looked up from her phone. My father smiled, distracted. The conversation was shallow, about traffic, about my brother's new car, about the rising cost of flights. When the waiter asked what we were celebrating, I said, "My graduation." He smiled and said, "Congratulations." But my mother corrected him, "She just barely passed." She said it so casually, so effortlessly cruel, that the waiter just nodded awkwardly and walked away. I wanted to shrink into my chair. My father muttered something under his breath, but he didn't defend me. It was strange how even small humiliations can feel enormous when they come from the people who are supposed to protect you. The night went on, and I kept pretending it didn't hurt. I made jokes. I talked about my plans. I tried to sound hopeful. But she didn't smile once. Finally, the waiter brought out the cake, small, white frosting, the words "Congratulations, Hina," piped in pink. My father raised his glass. To our daughter, he said softly, who worked hard and made us proud. For a moment, I felt seen again. I smiled. And then she spoke. I don't know what we're celebrating, she said. All she's done is make our lives harder since the day she came into it. We wish she was never born. Her tone was calm, her posture perfect, like she was discussing the weather. But the words hit like a slap. The waiter froze mid-step. A couple nearby stopped eating. My father's face went pale. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just sat there, staring at her, at the woman who raised me, who fed me, who taught me how to hold a spoon, who now looked at me like I was a mistake she never forgave herself for making. That night, something in me ended. But something else began. Because what nobody knew, what even I didn't realize yet, was that my mother's cruelty wasn't random. It had roots. Deep, hidden roots that went far back, into secrets buried long before I was born. And soon, I would dig them all up. For days after that dinner, the words replayed in my head like an echo that refused to fade. We wish you were never born. They didn't just hurt, they hollowed me. Each time I remembered them, I'd feel that same burning behind my eyes, that ache in my chest that made it hard to breathe. But then came something worse, silence. After the dinner, my mother went back to life as if nothing happened. She still arranged the flowers on the dining table every morning. Still complained about how the maid folded the laundry. Still wore her pearls on Fridays. And I just drifted through the house like a ghost. It wasn't that I expected an apology. I'd long stopped expecting that from her. But part of me thought she'd at least acknowledge what she said. Even a small moment of regret. But there was nothing. Every morning, she'd look at me with that same distant politeness, the kind you give to a stranger at the grocery store. The silence was her way of rewriting the story. And I think that's when suspicion first began to grow. A week later, I found myself sitting in my father's study. He rarely used it. It was a small, dim room lined with old books that smelled faintly of dust and perfume, like the remnants of who he used to be. He was reading the newspaper, pretending not to notice the tears gathering in my eyes. "Abu," I finally said, breaking the silence. "Do you know why she hates me so much?" His hands stilled. He didn't look up. "Your mother doesn't hate you, Hina," he said softly. "She just doesn't know how to love the way you need." It was the kind of vague answer that left more wounds than comfort. "Then why did she say that?" I whispered. He folded the newspaper slowly, his eyes still avoiding mine. "Some things are better left alone," he murmured. That's when I knew he knew something. Over the next few days, I started noticing things I'd never noticed before. Like the way my mother's eyes flickered whenever I mentioned my late grandmother. Or how she'd abruptly change the subject if anyone brought up the year I was born. There was also that photograph, the one that used to hang in the hallway. It was of my parents, holding a baby. For years, I thought that baby was me. But when I looked closely one afternoon, something didn't feel right. The baby's blanket was blue. And my mother, smiling so genuinely, had written a date at the back of the frame, 1997. But I was born in 1998. I remember holding the photo and feeling my stomach twist. I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was just mislabeled. But deep down, something about it felt wrong. That night, as I lay in bed, I overheard my parents arguing in the living room. My mother's voice, sharp, trembling with anger, cut through the walls. "She's asking questions again," she said. "If she finds out, Rashid, it'll destroy everything." My father's voice came quieter, pleading. "She has a right to know. Right?" My mother snapped. "That girl was never supposed to exist in the first place." I sat up in bed. My throat went dry. What did she mean, never supposed to exist? The room spun. My chest ached. It all made sense now, the coldness, the resentment, the way she'd look at me like I was an intruder in her own home. She didn't see me as her daughter. She saw me as the child who lived when her first one didn't. That night, I didn't hate her. I didn't even cry. I just sat by my window, watching the city lights flicker, thinking about how grief can turn love into something sharp and cruel. But still, there was something inside me, something unfinished. Because if she blamed me for surviving, then I needed to show her that surviving wasn't a sin. And I knew exactly how to do it. I didn't confront her right away. For a few days, I moved around the house like I was walking on thin ice. Every sound, every glance felt like it might shatter something that had been barely holding together for years. My father's words echoed in my mind. She couldn't love you without remembering him. I wanted to understand. I wanted to forgive. But more than anything, I wanted the truth, all of it. 3 nights later, I found my mother sitting alone in the living room. The television was on but muted, the blue light flickering across her face. She was holding a cup of tea, her posture perfect as always, her expression unreadable. I stood in the doorway, my palms sweating. "Amy," I said softly. She didn't look up. "What is it now?" My throat tightened. "Who is Adil?" Her hand froze midair. The cup rattled slightly against the saucer. Then, slowly, she turned to face me, her face pale, her eyes sharp. "Where did you hear that name?" I held her gaze. "I found his birth certificate." For a moment, the only sound was the ticking of the wall clock. Then she laughed, short, brittle. "So your father told you?" "He told me he died," I said. "But he didn't tell me how." Something flickered in her eyes, fear or maybe anger. "It doesn't matter. He's gone." "It matters to me," I said, stepping closer. "He was my brother." Her jaw tightened. "You wouldn't understand." "Then help me understand." My voice cracked. "All my life you've treated me like a mistake. Like I'm some kind of curse. I need to know why." Her eyes glistened, not with softness, but with something buried, something that had been waiting to explode. "You want the truth," she said quietly. "Then sit down." She set her cup aside and leaned back, her hands trembling slightly even though she tried to hide it. "Adil was my first child," she began. "Perfect. Beautiful. Everything I ever wanted. I had a difficult pregnancy, but I didn't care. I thought love was enough to protect him." Her voice faltered. "He was sick," she continued. "Born premature. The doctors said he needed constant care. I stayed awake for nights, watching him breathe. Every small cough, every sound, it terrified me. But I did everything I could." A tear slipped down her cheek, the first I had seen from her in years. "Then one night," she whispered, "I fell asleep. Just for a few minutes. When I woke up, he wasn't breathing." Her voice broke on the last word. My heart clenched. "Amy." She shook her head. "Your father was at work. I called the ambulance. They couldn't save him. Everyone said it wasn't my fault, but I knew it was. I killed him, Hina. I killed my baby." Her words hung in the air, heavy and jagged. I felt tears stinging my own eyes. "You didn't kill him, Amy. You were exhausted. It was an accident." But she wasn't listening. She was somewhere else, lost in that night, trapped in her own guilt. "And then you were born," she said, her tone shifting, colder now. "You cried so loudly the moment they placed you in my arms. And all I could think was, why him? Why did he have to die and you get to live?" Her words sliced through me. "I tried," she continued. "I tried to love you. But every time I looked at you, I saw his face. I saw what I lost. You were a constant reminder of my failure." Her voice hardened. "So yes, I said things I shouldn't have. I pushed you away. Because it was easier to hate you than to face what I did." I sat there, trembling. The truth was cruel, but it was also raw, too human to hate. "I'm not him, Amy," I whispered. "I never tried to replace him." She looked at me then, really looked at me, and for a moment, I saw something crack in her expression. Regret. Maybe even love, buried under years of pain. But just as quickly, she looked away. "It doesn't matter now," she said. "Nothing can change what's been done." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake replaying everything, the way her voice trembled, the way she looked when she said his name. For the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt something worse, pity. Because my mother wasn't cruel for the sake of it. She was broken. And she'd built her cruelty like a wall to survive her own guilt. But walls can't last forever. And I realized if she couldn't face what she'd done, maybe it was time someone helped her. So I did something no one expected. The next morning, I went to the cemetery. It took me hours to find Adil's grave, small, tucked away under the shade of a neem tree. The headstone was weathered, the name barely visible. I brought fresh white lilies, the same flowers my mother kept in the living room every week. Maybe she didn't even realize why she chose them. I knelt down, brushing away the dust. "Hi, Adil," I whispered. "It's your sister." The wind was soft, the air thick with the scent of earth and rain. I think she's been carrying you all this time," I said quietly. "But I don't want to carry her pain anymore. I want to remember you differently." I stayed there for a long time, until the sun dipped low behind the trees. When I got home that evening, I left the lilies on the dining table. My mother saw them and froze. "Where did you get these?" she asked. "From where you left him," I said softly. Her face drained of color. "You went there?" "Yes. And you should too." She didn't answer. Just turned away, her lips trembling. For the first time in my life, she didn't have words. And I think that's when the healing began, not loud, not dramatic. Just quietly, in the space between us, where pain finally met truth. The following week felt strangely quiet. The kind of quiet that hums beneath your skin, not peace, but the uneasy stillness before something breaks. My mother hadn't spoken much since that night. She went about her routines, cooking, cleaning, humming old ghazals under her breath, but there was a distance in her eyes, a haunted kind of focus. Sometimes I'd catch her standing at the window, staring into nothing, her hands twisting the edge of her shawl. I knew she was thinking about him, about Adil. And I knew something inside her was beginning to shift slowly, painfully, the way old wounds do when they start to heal. One evening, as I was setting the table for dinner, she said it so quietly I almost didn't hear her. "I want to go there." I turned. "Where?" She didn't meet my eyes. "The grave." For a moment, I couldn't move. I'd waited my whole life for her to say something like that, to admit that she'd been wrong, that she felt something. But when it finally happened, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like mercy. "Okay," I said softly. "I'll take you." That Sunday, we drove out together, just the two of us. The road to the cemetery was narrow and uneven, lined with old banyan trees that reached across like arms. My mother sat stiffly beside me, clutching a folded piece of paper in her hands. She'd been holding it since morning, but hadn't said what it was. When we arrived, she hesitated to step out. "I don't know if I can face him," she whispered. "You already have," I said. "Every day." Her lips trembled, but she nodded. We walked together to the small, shaded grave. She stopped a few feet away, staring at the headstone like it was a mirror reflecting every regret she'd buried inside herself. Then she knelt, slowly, carefully, and laid the folded paper on the ground. Her voice shook as she spoke. "I wrote this after he died," she said. "It was supposed to go in his coffin, but I couldn't let it go. I've kept it for 26 years. She opened it with trembling hands. The paper was yellowed, fragile at the edges. She began to read. "My dearest son, I hope you're warm. I hope the angels know you liked the color blue and the sound of rain. I hope you know I didn't mean to fall asleep. I hope you can forgive me, because I never will." Her voice cracked on the last word. I couldn't hold back my tears anymore. When she finished, she pressed the letter against the headstone and whispered, "Goodbye." Then she really looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw her as just a woman. Not a mother. Not a figure to fear or obey. Just a woman who had carried too much pain for too long. "I don't deserve forgiveness," she said quietly. I knelt beside her. "Maybe not," I said gently. "But you deserve peace." She turned her head, eyes glistening. "And you? Do you forgive me?" That question hung between us like smoke. I thought about all the nights I'd cried into my pillow, the dinners where her silence cut sharper than any insult, the graduation night when her words tore through me. "I'm trying," I whispered. "Some days I do. Other days, I still hurt." Her hand found mine, tentative, shaking. "That's more than I deserve." "No," I said. "It's exactly what you deserve." We stayed there for a long time, no more words, just two people who had finally stopped pretending they weren't broken. When we drove home, something felt different. The air between us wasn't heavy anymore, it was fragile, but open. At home, my father was waiting in the living room. When he saw the lilies in her hands, his expression softened. "You went?" he asked quietly. She nodded. I said goodbye. He reached for her hand, and she let him. I stood there watching them, realizing that grief had stolen so much from all of us: years, laughter, love. But maybe this was how it gave something back. A few days later, my mother surprised me again. She was sitting at the dining table with a notebook in front of her. When I walked in, she looked up and said, "I've been writing something." "Another letter?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "A beginning." She turned the notebook toward me. On the first page, in careful handwriting, she had written, "To my daughter, Hina." My chest tightened. "Amy, I don't know how to say everything I want to," she said. "So I thought I'd start here. Maybe you can read it one day, when it doesn't hurt so much." I didn't trust my voice enough to answer. Instead, I just hugged her tightly, without words. And she didn't pull away. That night, for the first time in years, we had dinner together, all three of us. There were no speeches, no apologies, no dramatic confessions. Just small talk, shared food, and quiet smiles that said more than words ever could. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end of our story. Because healing isn't a single moment, it's 1,000 small choices to stay, to speak, to try again. And I was ready to keep choosing. The change between us was quiet, too quiet for anyone else to notice. But to me, it was everything. My mother started speaking softer. Not the brittle, polite tone she used with guests, but a quieter, human one. Sometimes she'd call me into the kitchen to taste the curry, like she used to do with my father years ago. Other times, she'd leave small things on my desk, a folded scarf, a handwritten note that just said, "Take care of yourself." I didn't trust it at first. I waited for her to retreat again, for the coldness to return. But it didn't. Not completely. And then life, being what it is, decided to test that fragile piece. 2 weeks after the visit to Adil's grave, my parents were invited to a neighborhood dinner. It wasn't just any dinner, it was the annual community recognition event, the kind of gathering where everyone put on their best clothes and their best versions of themselves. Every year, my mother volunteered to organize it. She loved control, loved the illusion of perfection. But this time, she didn't. She stayed quiet when they called her, simply saying, "Let someone else do it." It surprised everyone. That evening, as we were getting ready, she hesitated at the mirror. Her hands trembled as she adjusted her dupatta. "Do I look all right?" she asked. It was such a simple question, but hearing her ask for reassurance, something she'd never done, made my throat tighten. "You look beautiful, Amy." She smiled faintly. It's been a long time since anyone said that. The dinner was held in the community hall, strings of golden lights, the smell of biryani, laughter echoing off the tiled walls. People came up to greet her, complimenting her sari, her grace, her poise. She smiled, but her eyes searched the crowd constantly, as if she were afraid of something. Halfway through the evening, the host took the stage. "Tonight," he said cheerfully, "we're honoring some of our community's most inspiring families. People who've shown strength through hardship." He began calling names. Applause, photographs, more applause. Then, unexpectedly, he said, "And finally, we'd like to recognize Mrs. Rahat Khan and her daughter, Hina, for their perseverance and dedication." I froze. I hadn't known about this. Neither had she. People turned, clapping. Cameras flashed. Someone called out, "Speech, Mrs. Khan." My mother looked like she wanted the ground to open up and swallow her whole. She shook her head, whispering, No, I can't." But the host was already holding out the microphone. So she walked up slowly, her hands trembling. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. She stood under the lights, the crowd waiting, expectant smiles all around her. For a moment, she looked poised, composed, the woman everyone knew. Then she said quietly, "I'm not sure I deserve this." The room fell silent. She swallowed, gripping the microphone tightly. For many years, I pretended. I wanted people to see me as strong, disciplined, successful. A good mother. She paused. But I wasn't. A few murmurs rippled through the audience. Her voice wavered, but didn't break. I lost my first child when he was just an infant. I blamed myself. I carried that guilt like a stone inside me. And when my daughter was born, I punished her for surviving what I couldn't save. Gasps filled the room. I felt my chest tighten. "I said terrible things to her," she continued, her voice trembling now. "I told her she shouldn't have been born. I made her believe she was unwanted. But she stayed. She forgave me. And, because of her, I learned how to breathe again. Her eyes found mine across the crowd, raw, unguarded. "I'm not here tonight because of strength," she said softly. "I'm here because my daughter taught me that love isn't something you earn. It's something you return, even when it's late." The room was silent. Even the air felt still. And then, someone started clapping. It spread slow at first, then louder, fuller, until the entire hall was on their feet. I stood there frozen, tears streaming down my face, watching my mother, the same woman who once told me she wished I'd never been born, now standing before a crowd, admitting her flaws, her guilt, her love. When she stepped down from the stage, she walked straight toward me. Without a word, she took my hand and kissed it. The flash of cameras caught that moment, the image of a woman breaking open her own silence, and I think, deep down, she finally forgave herself too. That night, as we drove home, the city lights blurred outside the window. My mother sat beside me, quiet but calm, her face illuminated by the passing glow of street lamps. She turned to me and said, "You know, I thought the hardest thing was losing him. But it wasn't." "What was?" I asked, living like I didn't lose myself too. I reached over, taking her hand in mine. "You found yourself again, Amy." She smiled faintly. "No, Beta. You found me." That was the last time she ever spoke about a deal. Not because she wanted to forget, but because she finally remembered him with peace. And for the first time, I wasn't her mistake. I was her redemption. Time has a strange way of softening things. The words that once burned inside me, "We wish you were never born," still echoed sometimes, but they no longer tore me apart. They were like old scars. Visible, yes, but no longer bleeding. After that night at the community dinner, my mother changed in small, deliberate ways. Not instantly, not dramatically, but gradually, the way dawn replaces the darkness one sliver of light at a time. She started asking about my day. She began joining me for tea in the mornings, even when she didn't have much to say. Sometimes she'd sit beside me in silence, her presence gentle but solid, like an apology without words. And for me, that was enough. One morning, I found her in the garden, kneeling among the roses. Her hair was streaked with silver, her hands dirt-stained, but there was peace on her face, a kind of softness I'd never seen before. When she saw me, she smiled. "You remember how your father always wanted these roses to bloom?" I nodded. "Well," she said, patting the soil, "it took me 20 years, but I finally listened." I sat beside her, the smell of damp earth and fresh petals filling the air. "Do you still think about him?" I asked quietly. Her smile faded into something gentler. "Every day. But it's different now. I used to see him in my nightmares. Now, I see him when the wind moves the curtains. When I hear laughter in this house again." She looked at me, eyes glistening. "He's still with me. Just not in pain anymore." There was a long pause. Then she said, almost shyly, "You know, I used to think I didn't deserve a daughter like you." I blinked, my throat tightening. "Amy." She shook her head softly. "Let me finish." Her voice trembled, but her words were steady. "You were the one who stayed when I made it hardest to love me. You gave me a second chance when I didn't even ask for one. And that night, when you took me to him, you gave me back a part of myself I thought I'd buried." Tears welled in my eyes. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "You just did," I said quietly. The years that followed were kinder than I expected. My mother and I began hosting small family dinners, something she used to dread. Our home, once filled with silence and tension, became warm again. The smell of food, the sound of laughter, even the occasional argument, it all felt alive. My father, too, seemed lighter. He no longer had to mediate between our pain. Sometimes, I'd catch him watching us from across the table, his expression peaceful, as if he was finally watching the ending he'd prayed for all along. On my next birthday, my mother surprised me with something small but unforgettable. It was a framed photograph, not of me, not of a deal, but of us, taken years ago when I was around 6. I was sitting in her lap, looking up at her, and she was smiling down at me. On the back, she had written, "For every moment I made you doubt your worth, remember, You were always my light. I just couldn't see through the dark. I cried so hard that day, she had to hold me like a child again. And maybe, in that embrace, both of us finally got the mother and daughter we'd been waiting for all along. When I graduated again, this time with my master's degree, she insisted on hosting a dinner herself. It wasn't fancy. Just close family, a few neighbors, soft lights, and the smell of her cooking filling the house. When it was time to speak, she tapped her glass gently and said, "The last time we celebrated Hina's graduation, I said something unforgivable. Something that haunted both of us for years." I tried to stop her. "Amy, you don't have to." But she held up her hand. "I do." She looked around the table, then at me. That night, I told my daughter we wished she was never born. Her voice trembled. But the truth is, her birth was the only thing that kept me alive. She became my reason to try again, to forgive myself, to love when I thought I couldn't. The room was silent. Then she smiled through tears. "So tonight, I want to say the words I should have said all those years ago." She turned to me and whispered, "We're so glad you were born." And I broke in the best way possible. We hugged, and this time it wasn't out of pain or guilt. It was out of love, fragile, healing, and finally free. Years later, when people ask me about my mother, I don't tell them about the cruelty or the years of silence. I tell them about the garden she planted at 50, about how she learned to laugh again, about how she never missed a single birthday after that, and about how, one rainy afternoon, she placed a small white lily in my hand and said, "You know, this was his favorite flower. But now, it's yours too." That's the thing about forgiveness. It doesn't erase the past. It redeems it. And love, the real kind, isn't loud or perfect. It's quiet. It's patient. It's two broken people choosing each other again and again until the hurt becomes history. Some stories don't end with a grand apology. Some end with a quiet morning, the smell of tea, the sound of a mother's laugh that used to be rare, and a daughter finally breathing without the weight of old words pressing on her chest. If you had asked me years ago whether I could forgive my mother, I would have said no. I would have said that some wounds cut too deep to ever heal. But life has a way of softening even the sharpest edges. Because forgiveness isn't about saying it's okay. It's about saying it hurt, but I won't let it define me anymore. The truth is, my mother never stopped being the woman who hurt me. But she also became the woman who tried to make it right, one small act at a time. And maybe that's what redemption really looks like, not perfection, but the courage to start again, even when the past is watching. When I think about that night, the graduation dinner, her words slicing through the joy of everything I had worked for, I still feel a sting. But then I remember the way she looked at me years later, trembling, whispering, "We're so glad you were born." And somehow, that one sentence stitched together everything that had fallen apart. If you're listening to this and you've ever carried the weight of someone else's brokenness, if you've been hurt by the very person who is supposed to protect you, I want you to remember this. Sometimes, people who hurt you are fighting battles you can't see. Sometimes, love doesn't come in the form you expected. And sometimes, healing begins with the words you never thought you'd hear, or the forgiveness you never thought you could give. I learned that being born into pain doesn't mean you have to stay there. You can choose what comes next. So I chose love. I chose peace. And I chose to believe that maybe, just maybe, she meant it when she said she was glad I was born. What about you? Would you have forgiven her or walked away? Tell me in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe, because sometimes sharing our stories helps others find their healing too.